All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call the Committee of Economic Development Committee meeting to order on Thursday, April 9th, 2020. The time now is 5:32. And for roll call, will all members identify that are present?
Tim Neighbors.
Gene Crosby.
Dan Fellers.
Bert Gerald.
And I do see that we have Dorothy Red and Paul Arena there as well.
Dorothy Red.
Paul's muted.
Or asleep, or just frozen.
Paul's here as well. All right, and from actually, hold on, I have the list here. And from staff, we have Chris Dornbush present. And from the State's Attorney's Office, I see that we actually also have Dave Karolinkis as well as Marilyn. And Mr. Chairman's joining in and a few other board members as well. All right, so today we're going to be moving on to the item, with that roll call. For the public comment section, I'm going to go ahead and withhold that. I don't believe we have any public comment or anybody that announced that they would be here for public comment, so we'll skip past that portion. We're moving on to the item of business today, the item for discussion today, which is a discussion for partnering with Northern Illinois Community Development Corporation, City of Rockford, and City of Loves Park to establish the COVID-19 Emergency Loan Fund Program. In regards to that, I'd actually like to have, I'll give a brief description. Obviously, most of you have seen on the news that we have actually been called upon to partner up with our local community and local members, local municipalities, City of Rockford and City of Loves Park, as well as the NICDC, and being part of this loan program, which will actually run through the RLDC. So with that, they were calling to us to be a part of it at $250,000. Our investment would be actually a loan program. So that way we're not at the forefront, we're not the biggest investors in the group. So we are going to be slated to be paid back on that. That's what I was updated on recently. And from that also, we will be not the first ones to be paid back, but we would be paid back. With that, I'll actually go ahead and discuss that. This is something that's been called upon by many different local businesses and a lot of our small businesses. And this is where our focus is at, is helping those local businesses out and trying to see if we can make sure that we can get them the funding that they need, because the federal funding is taking some time. Right now, I do believe I'm right in saying we didn't have John Phelps join us today, but he's been inundated with multiple businesses that have actually applied for this loan program already. It's gotten off on the right foot so far. So I'd like to call to Chris Dornbush if he'd like to add in any other important items as far as that goes, and then I'll open it to the other members to discuss. Dan, I saw your hand up. I'll call on you first after Chris gives us more information. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For my understanding of this right now, what's being proposed is a $250,000 loan from the county to RLDC, which will disperse to small businesses that will range in 60 to 90 day loans, ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. John Phelps with RLDC has certain criteria that is still needed to apply. It's essentially gap funding before the Small Business Administration will disperse their funds to try to get the small businesses in the area some time to operate before the funds get dispersed. Because even though they're released, they still have to be processed through the applications and out to the businesses, which still may take some time. So this is a little bit quicker to get out as far as that. City of Loves Park, City of Rockford, several banks, and some private investors are participating in it, and we would be part of that. The banks would be for the loans, the banks would be the first ones to be paid back initially, and then the municipalities and the county would be second to be paid back if the loans were to go bad. It's a 0% from the county to RLDC. RLDC will charge some percentage for the loans, basically a 1% management fee on that for each of them. And they're building in, overall it's about a 6%, I think is what they're charging. And they'll cover some potential loss, but they're short-term loans. They're not trying to look to really make profit off of it, but there are some interest rates that will be associated with. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Following that, I do actually want to go ahead and mention it. There's been a lot of talks about it, and we finally got the information going through last week, I believe it was, that Chris was forwarded that information. Everybody worked vigilantly on it, so we're moving forward. We were hoping to have it ready by this week. We finally got something that's kind of ready, so we'll be looking to actually schedule another committee meeting early next week and have an emergency county board meeting so we can actually go ahead and act on this. It did take some time putting together. We are piggybacking, however, there was a lot of information that had to be gone through. So with that, I want to actually thank staff and everyone else involved that was a part of this process. So I'm going to move on to county board member discussion. I did see that Dan Fellers had his hand up first. So Dan, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was actually just answered regarding moving forward on this as quickly as possible. It's good to see that we were discussing having a special meeting of the county board to move quickly. And I just want to, Chris, I just wanted to clarify to apply for this, small businesses must have an SBA loan application that has been submitted, and then the loan that the RLDC will be doing will be paid back from funds distributed through the SBA loan. Is that accurate?
To my understanding, Mr. Fellers, yes.
Thank you.
I had Mr. Arena, and then after that, I'll go to Mr. Chairman. Go ahead, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the 3% interest is going to be received by the banks as profit. Is that correct?
To my understanding, yes.
And the borrower is going to pay 3% interest on the money that we're contributing at 0%?
No, the loans, I'm not quite sure exactly on how RLDC is breaking out the funds, but what they're looking at is 6%, I believe, with 3% to the bank, 2% to for potential defaults of the funds, and then 1% would be the management fee overall.
Okay, so the problem I see with what I read is that we're contributing money at 0%. The banks are contributing money and generating a profit for themselves. We absorb the loss for defaults. You know, the banks get paid back first, they're made whole, they make a profit, and then we're left with what's left over at the end and absorb the loss of defaults. That's one issue I have with it. And the second is I would like to see some assurance that the money is distributed countywide so that I know that within my district, some of the money will end up here. And I don't see anything in there that talks about how the money is, how they're going to control that distribution. So those are questions I'd like to have clarified before I would support it. Thank you.
Mr. Dornbush, do you want to add to that? Or actually, Mr. Karolinkas, if you had anything that you wanted to add to that or clarify that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what Chris said is pretty accurate, and I think what Mr. Arena's questions are, I don't have answers to that. We are subordinating our loans to the loans of the bank, and I think in one of the documents, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, it also says that there are private investors that are doing this too, and I think both those groups are going to get the 3% return on their particular investments in this thing. But by subordinating our loan, that means in any business transaction, you know this, when you subordinate a loan, it means that you are stepping back and letting somebody take first or second position in it. It's just like having a second mortgage on your house.
Correct.
All right, thank you, Mr. Karolinkas. Chairman, you had your hand up, and then I'll go to you, John. John, okay, but go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, a couple things. Yes, we would be last to be paid back, or we would be among the last of with the other public entities. That is by design. That did allow us to bring private partners to the table at a time when they are also on their business portfolio getting hammered. So we brought banks to the table, and we're well over $2 million because of that. Yes, we're subordinate, meaning, yeah, if there's a shortage, the city of Rockford, Loves Park, and the county would get hit before the banks, but that got them to the table, and it got a lot of their money in play that would not otherwise be. So they're still willing to take other banking partners. It is a selling point at a time when, quite frankly, banks are nervous about cash, but it did get them to the table, and it did help them get where they're willing to give money at a time everybody else is restricting. In terms of Mr. Arena's very good question, and it's an appropriate question for board members to say, well, who could this help? It does help small businesses, as does our other partnerships with RLDC and NICDC. It is a county-wide program. Historically, it's been a county-wide program. It is not limited to a particular municipality. And county money is if you know, John would tell you this, John Phelps, it is given with the understanding it's not restricted to a particular municipality. That said, there can be no guarantee that each of the 20 districts gets a piece of this. Part of that is determined based on who applies and who is determined to be, you know, again, we don't have anything to do with the approval process of a particular loan. We are out of that process the way we are every other loan process with RLDC. But the spirit and the history, there's a documented history of that being a county-wide program, to Mr. Arena's question. I did have a question though, Mr. Billick, and I just want to understand it. I find it, I guess, peculiar that in the whereas in the resolution that was put together by the state's attorney's office, that it basically grants the state's attorney where they don't just review, but they approve all documents. And I guess my thing is, I don't know that we want to put somebody else in charge of approving anything. Reviewing it on behalf of the county or county board is one thing, but being able to then have to give approval actually puts them in a position of governance. If I'm reading
This is Marilyn, if I could speak to that, Mr. Chair.
Please do, Marilyn.
Okay, so whenever the state's attorney is inserted in any documents we prepare on behalf of the county, it's basically to make sure everything going through it follows the legal protocol. The state's attorney is not trying to usurp anyone's position as far as governance, but as legal counsel for the elected officials and the county board, it is my responsibility to make sure any documents the county board signs off on can withstand legal muster. So that is the purpose. Mr. Karolinkas did draft this document at the request of Mr. Dornbush. It took him a few days because obviously he wanted to make sure that he understood exactly what the plan was that the county wanted to do. So I will let Mr. Karolinkas weigh in on that if you desire. Thank you.
Thank you, State's Attorney. Mr. Chairman, if I could. Yeah, Chris Dornbush and I spent, Chris, what was it, well in excess of an hour and a half on the phone trying to understand the process, number one. And then we worked through the language very carefully with the documentation in front of us. And I echo what the State's Attorney said. There's no intention to do this, to have any kind of a veto power on this at all, because we're turning this over. And as if you read the the resolution. You're simply turning this whole process over to the CIDC. Is that the right one?
NICDC.
CICDC, I'm sorry, NICDC. And then they're doing whatever they do with the RLDC. We have no control over that process at all. We just want to make sure that the documents are legally sufficient.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, this is Chris speaking. That bottom language just mirrors what is standard language for the revolving loan fund program for the loans that go through, and seeing that this was a similar in nature and to get the resolution done, like, we tried to kind of parallel what we typically do for the revolving loan fund language and resolutions.
And if I may, correct me if I'm wrong on this, the other municipalities actually have the same similar agreement going as well.
I believe they do. They're doing it, but I have not seen their copies, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Butita was patiently waiting. Go ahead, Mr. Butita.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I had a couple of points I wanted to make to Mr. Arena's questions, but I guess I do have an issue here, or a problem with this last subject that we're talking about. So, Chris, you're saying that this is standard language that we've taken out of the other loans that we do with John Phelps. Each one of those loans comes through our committee to get approved. Are we saying that the state's attorney or our committee is going to have to approve each individual loan that Phelps makes? If that's the case, I'm not in favor of that. I think they're much more qualified to review and make those qualification calls for these type of short-term bridge loans. So if the state's attorney could reply to that, I would hope that it's not the case that we have to review either through her office or our committee each individual loan.
This is Marilyn. I thought I had already answered that question. Was my answer unclear to anyone?
Repeat it, Marilyn.
Well, it was unclear to me based on what Chris said. He said that this is a standard language that we used in our other loans to the Rockford Development Corporation. So in that case, we approve each individual loan that they make in those cases. So that, if that's the standard language, is that again going to be applied here?
Again, the state's attorney is not a governing agency for the county. Winnebago County is a non-home rule form of government, and you govern. I am your legal counsel to prepare legal documents to make sure they follow the legal protocol, and that's what Mr. Kurlinkus did. If you want that language removed, you certainly can do that. Keep in mind that any documents my office prepares are documents we feel are proper so that they can pass legal muster.
Yeah, Marilyn, thank you for that answer.
Thank you,
Marilyn. Thank you for that answer. I think it was just referencing because the current loans that we do through the RLDC that the RLDC sends to us and approves or is going to approve on our behalf, still we have to do the final approval on each individual loan. And I think what he's saying is, are we going to have to approve each individual loan under this program, which is like a short-term one? What he's trying to say is that he doesn't see that we need to, because there's going to be a lot. There's a lot of people that have applied for this loan, so he's trying to avoid having to approve each individual one.
Well, as Mr. Kurlinkus indicated, once you provide the funds, the $250,000, you have no control over the disbursement of those funds.
Perfect.
Does that answer your question, John? Thank you. I did see a couple hands up earlier. Mr. Arena.
Can I just follow up on that, Mr. Chairman? Can I follow up on that, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Go ahead, Mr.
So that answers my question as far as that paragraph in the resolution. My second point that I did want to make in reference to Mr. Arena's point is that, we probably could have gotten hopefully a better deal than the way it's stipulated, but I've got confidence in John Phelps as being one of the, probably being the premier commercial lender in this community. And his track record with our county has been excellent. So in that sense, I have confidence, even though, I don't like being at the back of the line to collect our money. I feel good. I feel that on balance, the need to get this money out to small businesses versus our risk is, I can live with that. And I was just going to say one other thing to Mr. Arena's point about, and I sympathize with, we want to make sure that the money is available to throughout the county, but I'm not sure how you would really analyze it, because I could have a business that's located in Loves Park, but my residence is in maybe Mr. Arena's district, and maybe I got 3 employees who live in Rockford, McChesney Park and South Beloit. So, the scope of any small company can be all over the county. So I think that's going to be pretty hard to determine.
But I think in regards to what Paul said on that one, Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong. He was just more concerned to make sure that this is not going to be a loan program only for the partners involved, meaning the municipalities involved, I should say, meaning City of Rockford, City of Loves Park, but to make sure that this is actually going to be a county-wide program. And I do believe that discussion was evident, and I do believe, Chris, if you correct me if I'm wrong, or Dave, if you wanted to, correct me if Mr. Kurlinka, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that as per our portion of the agreement, this is a county-wide program. Like, it's allowed, it doesn't matter which portion of the county you're in, you can apply for this program, correct?
Yes, Mr. Billich, that's correct. Oh, sorry, Mr. Kurlinka.
Okay, I don't know if that helps answer your question. Mr. Arena, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand the conversation about distribution of the loans throughout the county. Difficult, I'll have to give some thought to that point. I want to make sure, to Mr. Petita's point, businesses, where the business is located. So businesses that are in my district, I want to make sure have availability to these funds. That they haven't already been committed at the time that we're making this approval. That would be one, thing I'd want to know. How much has already been, how much in applications do they already have? And secondly, I still don't understand the financial structure here. We lend out money at 0%. They in turn take the money we gave them at 0% and lend it at 6%, right? So they're taking 2% to attribute to losses, 1% to expenses for the RLDC. So what happens to the other 3%? It seems to me we should be lending it at 3% and then agreeing that we're subordinate to the other partners, and we're going to absorb the losses at the end of the program, but maybe that 3% will cover those losses. It sounds like if the program is successful, there'll be a surplus at the end. So somehow that needs to be addressed here. Right? The financial structure doesn't make sense from the documentation we have. So that's where I'm going to be asking for some clarification over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Anybody else? I got a hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Billick. I would say this, at the beginning of this conversation, the city of Rockford and Winnebago were asked to put in $250 cash with no loan. It was just going to be a grant that would not come back a nickel of it. Over the course of conversations, that has changed, to my understanding, to it is simply a loan. I would make the argument that given the fact that we are taking a little bucket of water into a forest fire, there's a number of businesses. There are more businesses that need our help than we're going to be able to help. And the idea is, if it turns out, I think everybody will probably wind up taking a haircut on this a little bit, because not everybody's going to perhaps be in a position to pay back. I hope I'm wrong. But at the end of the day, if our LDC or NICDC makes $1 and they can reinvest it in another small business, I don't think that's a bad thing. I thought, and it was my recommendation initially, that we just give the 250 with no expectation of return, but now it's turned into a loan. So if we get most of that back, actually, I think we're doing really good. But I understand the concern that was raised. Thank you.
And for future reference on what Paul said, just because you're in this meeting right now, Mr. Chairman, I think he's referencing that for future negotiations, based on the loans that we give out, that we should see some kind of 1% or any kind of return. Obviously, in this situation, I would say that obviously this should not be a program to take advantage of the populace. This should not be a program to take advantage of the businesses. After multiple conversations with Mr. McDonald and a few other members as well, I've mentioned multiple times that it is now at this stage where our community is depending on us to help bail them out in essence. And a lot of these small companies, they don't have a bailout program. And it actually doesn't exist. There's not really an actual bailout. You're applying for a bunch of loans and the federal government said that if you use it properly or for certain specific usages, then they would forgive it. But that's not a guarantee. There's a lot of non-guarantees right now. And a lot of local businesses have reached out and said that they're really concerned because they really don't, there's a lot of them that really might not stand a chance to actually be around after this. And it's really scary for a lot of them. And so in regards to that, I just wanted to add that piece on there, Mr. Chairman, for future reference, if you could, on negotiation side of things. I believe me and Mr. Arena and Mr. Girl, I know that you echoed this as well. And Mr. Salgado, I know that he's not part of this committee, but he is present. He's also mentioned that there are always ways that we can figure out how we can create more revenue streams. And that is one of them that we have not capitalized on, but could possibly, not in a big way, but still. At this point, it's not about capitalizing on our community. It's about providing our community the help that they need, especially being the taxing body that they actually pay their taxes to. So any other discussion? All right, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Schultz, you want to add something in there?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just I have similar concerns to what Mr. Arena already represented, that we'll be the last to be paid, but we bear the greatest risk of loss. I'll just say I'm deeply troubled by what the chairman had said in terms of this is how we got banks to the table. One of the things that I've observed is that the chairman got way far out in front of this as it relates to committing, in my view, the board to make a decision in regard to this. It was presented in terms of the concept at a meeting, and then later it was, well, I didn't hear anybody object. Well, it was only a concept. And then in the press, it's being said that we're committing these dollars when the committee hasn't even met to discuss that. And, you know, I'm very troubled about the sequence. I'm very troubled about the public face that this has had. And, you know, that is as much an issue for me. In fact, it's the largest issue for me at the moment. The concept of us putting $250,000 is a portion of a much larger pot. I don't think if we don't do this, that it won't still happen. And, you know, I don't like the terms and how it's structured, but I'm particularly concerned about the scope and the sequence of how this has been approached in the public.
For the sake of that, yeah, Mr. Schultz, actually, I'll comment first before I go to you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, for sake of time, I'll keep it really short. I did reference that conversation, actually. Me and the chairman spoke on that in that regard. And I've actually spoken to a few other members about that. Actually, the discussion as far as how it was presented or how the media actually took it was a little bit differently than obviously how it actually works. So this was an idea. This was a partnership discussion that was happening before. At the same time, it seemed like it was a done deal, but obviously we all know that it has to go through committee and then the county board has to finalize on it. This was a program that we finally have an opportunity to actually jump ahead and help out our local community, and hopefully people see it that way as far as that portion. But just to discuss on that portion that you said, that it was like presented as it was a for sure done deal. Nothing is a for sure done deal until we obviously vote on it. Same thing with the city level. The mayor actually was part of that meeting as well, and the city hadn't even voted on it yet. However, it is more along the lines of this is what's going on and this is how we're trying to attack this problem. That's on my end of it. Mr. Chairman, if you want to go ahead and add in on that.
Yeah, well, to Mr. Schultz's point, I think he could have, I would just welcome you, Steve, to pick up the phone. I'd be happy to talk to you about any process, including processes that I have a problem with too, because there's been a few. But what I would say is that at every conversation I had with internal partners and external partners, publicly, with the media, with banks, this is something that we're going to recommend to our board subject their approval. The idea that the banks don't want to wait for a methodical, lethargic, slow-moving government body in the middle of a soon-to-be recession or depression. We went at the speed of business, and we made it very clear. And we made it very clear at every turn and at every time with every person, subject board approval. But if you're suggesting that nobody can have a conversation about a hypothetical or a possible, or we're going to recommend this, but if the board says no, we're out. If we're saying that now is off the table, then the relevancy of Winnebago County government in any discussion, especially development, just went from wherever it was in the past to being worthless in the future. So I understand the concern. I was extremely respectful of this board, and the conversation with the Economic Development Chairman began immediately the second I got a heads up on this. I did not control the timeline. When I did say, hey, I believe in this, I'm not getting pushback, but we have to get this approved by our board. If they don't approve it, there is no money. We're tied, our hands are tied. If we just want to sit everything out, guys, we could do that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, for the sake of time, I'm moving on to Mr. Fellers, and yeah, we're going to keep this a nice meeting. Go ahead, Mr. Fellers.
Yeah, we're at time, so I'm going to make a motion here to end discussion and move on to item E.
To other matters. All right, let's go ahead and move to other matters. Anybody have any other matters that they'd like to discuss? Seeing no hands, I would call for, do I have a first for an adjournment? I have a first from Mr. Fellers and a second from Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Girl. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Chapman, are we ready to get the ball rolling?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right, then I will move to call this order, the Finance Committee meeting to order. I'll take roll call. Myself present, Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Girl.
Present.
Mr. Fiducia. I don't see he's on. Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Present, and I do see Mr. Fiducia, Mr. Chairman.
Do you? Okay, then stand corrected. Mr. Fiducia is here as well. So the next item is a public comment. Is there anyone, Steve, signed up?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Then we'll omit the public comment and move on to item D, which is a resolution authorizing the county administrator to enter agreements for providing PPEs to designated healthcare providers within the county. Can I get a motion and a second? Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Fiducia, second. I'll hand it over to Mr. Chapman to give a little description, and then we go take questions and discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to just explain that this particular item just surfaced last Friday when I received a call from the Emergency Operations Center that's coordinating the effort to deal with the various issues in the county as it relates to the COVID situation. They have a section down there called logistics, which is pretty much individuals, primarily from the fire department and other areas that have been trying to put together supplies that are needed not only for the public sector individuals and entities that are dealing with this particular situation, but also the nonprofits that are part of the situation, the nursing homes, other care facilities, so on. What they've been trying to do is obviously the biggest issue is trying to locate supplies throughout the country, everywhere. And one of the items that they've had a real issue with is disposable hospital gowns. Those particular items go for $5 or $6 a shot, and you can't reuse them. Once you've used them once, you end up tossing them away. They've in their, I guess, their thinking thought that maybe if they could put together some sort of a consortium of individuals that would look at some other alternatives, which they came up with primarily. I think it's reusable gowns that can be washed and so on, and therefore don't necessarily have to be pitched every time they're used. They could maybe come up with some kind of program. They've contacted Supply Corps, and they have a vendor that is willing to change some of their manufacturing processes in order to produce these particular gowns. However, there's a minimum quantity that's needed. What the ECO and the logistics section has proposed is that the county would, in essence, purchase those particular gowns for these entities based on the entities' supply needs. They would have to agree based on the agreement that is attached that they would purchase so many gowns and reimburse the county within, I think it's 30 days. And therefore, we could go ahead and get the quantities that are needed. There might be other purchases of this nature in the future, and that's why we've kind of made this particular resolution kind of general in nature, but it's really to assist the community and with hopefully no risk to the county. That we would probably pay the vendor 45 days after we receive the gown. So in essence, there should be not a cash flow problem, except for maybe 30 days. So the recommendation is that we would go ahead and approve this resolution along with the accompanying agreement. And that agreement would presumably change based on the type of product that we may purchase in the future. The amount is limited to $100,000. It wouldn't exceed that. So I guess that's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Is there any questions regarding this resolution? Mr. Girl?
Thank you, Chairman. My question is, would Mr. Chapman be in charge of locating these, or would Ann Johns, who has been doing that already, would she be doing that? How would this change how we're doing things now? I guess that would be my question.
Go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really a combined effort of not only Ann Johns, but also what they call the logistics section of the ECO operations. Those individuals are the ones that have been primarily coordinating the requests from the various entities and trying to determine the best way to get the needs met. So it's really a combined effort between the two.
All right. Any other questions regarding this resolution? Mr. Schultz.
We're confident that the whole amount that we're investing is going to be recovered because there's at least that much demand for these items.
Go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
Yes, we would know up front exactly how much is needed and which entity wants which product or how many products. They need a minimum of 2,500 in order to go forward with this particular purchase.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really quickly, I retired from the fire department, but I have taken the FEMA NIMS classes, National Incident Management classes. Chief Bergson from Rockford has offered to have a if you will, dumbed down 4 or 5 hour class for us electeds, which I hope that this brings to light that we could all use some more training as far as national incident management. But one thing that needs to happen is that we need to act quickly on things. Let's put Winnebago County in California in the middle of a forest fire. If we belittle the process and take forever to get necessary firefighting gear, obviously it's going to have horrible consequences. And then a lot of the NIMS from FEMA came through Hurricane Katrina, and that showed the need to have an organized system set up. So what they had is they had senators, and state representatives, and congressmen, and county board people, and city council members. They were all telling FEMA, this is the most important, this is most important, this is most important. So they've got a ton of people trying to direct what needs to happen. In FEMA, it does say that the county board chairman is who's in charge of the decision-making processes. Meaning if state representative X said, we need to save this, the county board chairman can't override any other elected. I look forward to moving quickly. I really don't care who authorizes the payment. I really don't care about that. But what we need to be able to do is learn from this and be able to move quickly in times of emergency. And if the hospital systems need something, I think we should react quickly. If because of us being a government entity, that means our buying power is leveraged in some way, I think we take advantage of that and get the help that we need to the front lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Haney.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Salgado. So here's what's happening every day, and is that there's a meeting at 10 a.m. with the hospitals, Chief Bergston, Dr. Martell, Rockford Mayor, some other folks in the EOC, and that is not the logistics team, but that is kind of the policy group at this point. Things are very dynamic. The amounts of orders with us being a clearinghouse, we're being asked to help on PPE by nursing homes that are short. Getting masks right now is a challenge. Ann Johns has done a great job. I would say this is that to Mr. McDonald's point is that to this point, we've made a lot of decisions because I've been able to do that per the declaration. We have ordered a whole bunch of equipment and PPE, 36,000 N95 masks. We've spent a lot of money with the idea we're getting it back. We've been doing this at a process. You know, I don't know, but right now I'm in the middle of those conversations. There is a logistics team that reports up to through Chief Bergston and some folks there. But I will just say this: we can't say, we're not in a position to say no on ordering things. We believe we're going to, with all honesty, get reimbursed by the entities locally or the federal government. We're just not in a position, or people are going to be short on the public safety side, the frontline healthcare worker side. I'm not suggesting anybody wants that to happen, but we need to go fast. The idea we waited a few days on the gowns to have this discussion probably isn't prudent because of the peak that's coming in like a couple weeks. So, it's frustrating to me, with all due respect, that this is like the one damn thing I can be involved with anymore. And now we're splitting it out. But I get it. Me and Steve work together great. We just got to go fast as hell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haney. Just want to touch base real quick. I think it's a good practical reason to have these communications across the board. I don't think by any means this is preventing emergency. We are all aware about being reimbursed for these individual things, emergency, either through FEMA, the federal government, whatever the case may be. But it's a good thought to at least have that communication with the board members so they're educated and what decisions are being made. I don't think this is a process to circumvent any of the funds, but however, I just want to point this out as well, is we have to look at our cash flow as well from our perspective. I understand it's an emergency. I'm not saying that we are not going to spend the money, but also we have to understand that on a month-to-month basis, based on our projections, based on our revenue coming in, our expenditures, there are cash flow issues potentially that could arise from this. So this is a well thought out process where we kind of have to address these circumstances and issues that we currently are in ourselves. So I don't think necessarily, I do agree with you guys 100% with Mr. McDonald, Mr. Haney, and anybody here. I don't think anybody is saying that we shouldn't provide these amenities for, you know, nursing homes or whatever. At the same time, we do have to be cognizant of the impact potentially to the county as a whole, what that could be. And I think having this line of communication, not only that, illustrates potentially the leadership that's kind of going on internally and outside with our partners to kind of address these issues that we're currently experiencing. It just brings more kudos, more cadence to it. So I just want to be careful with, you know, saying that we are preventing and escalating the issue potentially that's going to arise or is rising at this point in time. So just wanted to point that out as well. And we're looking not only that, but at the health of our financial institution as well, which is the county as a whole. Mr. Fiducia, you had a comment question. Unmute your.
How's that? Better?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Mr. McDonald, I have been lucky enough to take some NIMS training, and let me tell you, it's mind-numbing. But to Mr. Haney's point, I don't think he would do anything that wasn't prudent, especially in our time of need. And I would say that if we could make sure that our people are safe, or we could save one life, I think that sometimes we're going to have to forego what we need to forego. And I think Mr. Haney's done a really excellent job so far, and I want him to keep up what he's doing, because I think it's very important for this county.
Absolutely. Any other questions, comments on the resolution? Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking for, you're right, the county's got financial interest or problems forthcoming without a doubt. I'm just curious, what dollar amount can we attach per citizen so that way we can justify these spends? How much do you think each citizen is worth spending money on?
You're asking me directly? I believe life has no price, right?
I agree with that. I'm going back to your previous statements that we have to watch our financial, but the other message that I hear is, I'm sorry, we can't afford to help people be safe.
Absolutely not. That is not the comment that was made. You're taking it way out of context from my perspective on that nature. I'm just saying that from my perspective, this resolution came into play to keep everybody on the loop, to ensure that we have this communication, what's going on. Because once again, there's individuals out there saying someone's taking the decisions, or X, Y, and Z are making commitments that we can't afford, or whatever the case may be. You're right. Life has no price on it. I absolutely agree with you 100%. But at the same time, you know, we have a due diligence that we have to make sure from a financial standpoint, right? To make sure to our citizens on that aspect of it. We always have this discussion with public safety, with different issues that we currently have. Same thing when the well was breaking down and stuff like that. So I completely understand your point of view. I'm just saying why the resolution came into play and why it was brought to this attention. It by no means is this stopping the process or anything of that nature. I think it's a good dialogue to have on that aspect of it. So Mr. McDonald, then Mr. Haney, and then Ms. Crosby.
I'll be very brief. Based on 300,000 people, $100,000 ask, so we're talking about 33 cents a person.
Thank you.
Mr. Haney.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Salgado. So what I would say is that I guess you do raise a good point on the finances. Mr. McDonald raises a good point on the humans. I don't think there's any disagreement on either. It is oddly both, but I would say this is I want to be a good partner to you all and to Steve and John's, and I think Steve would agree, is doing an unbelievable job of making sure that some of these folks out there aren't gouging us. And then the guy, Matt, in the EOC and the logistics team, there is so much good work being done. It is almost, there's a few things with all due respect to the board, you deserve to know, but there's one or two things I can't tell you, but it's about an alternative site. And to your point, Mr. Salgado, and it's a good one, and I understand it. You don't want surprises. One of the things we probably need to do, and we owe it to the board, and I'm learning too, it's my first pandemic. It's all of our first pandemic. You either have a finance meeting on a Thursday or there's a board meeting the next Thursday. We should have a dedicated standing item where what the heck just happened on the financial side comes right to the full board one week, your committee the next. That's not unreasonable. That I don't think we built that contraption yet, but Ann Johns has a spreadsheet, and it is a concern of mine because Steve knows the county budget extremely well, and he's a huge asset right now. I'm more concerned on the financial side about the revenue projections for this next year. You indicated to me that in the lobby. I guess I would be looking, and I know we don't have a lot of time right now, but for how we can, as a unit, different, all that we are, get the information on where the heck this is going. Because I did hear the city of Rockford is projecting some pretty significant decreases in revenue in the near term being next 12, 18 months. And so getting that information in front of you guys as often as we can. I just want to be clear, all other stuff aside, that is critical because it's coming at you guys as fast on that side. But I do appreciate hearing everybody's commitment. We're going to have to go fast, communicate ASAP. I don't want you guys surprised on stuff. Steve, that's not who he is. He's sharing stuff. So I just want to re-echo a commitment to that as we go forward, because everybody's being put in a weird spot right now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Crosby, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. McDonald. You know, it's the same speech you give to us all the time. And there are people dying in nursing homes because they don't have the right equipment. You know, I had an employee lost her sister at Alden Debbie's this week. And they're not even testing for COVID right now because they're assuming a roommate already has it. I put my husband into hospice because I don't want him going to the hospital or a rehab center or anywhere else. So this is serious stuff, and you can't put a price on someone's life. And although you say that's not what I meant, it is in the responsibility of the communicator to make sure that they communicate it in a way that everyone understands. And I totally concur with Mr. McDonald. So you can whitewash it any way you want, Jaime, but this stuff is very, very serious and people are losing their lives. End of story.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby. I'll go to Mr. Girl.
May I say something? This is Angie Gore.
Hold on, Mr. Girl and then Ms. Goro. So Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make a point that this COVID pandemic is fluid. Things change daily. If something needs to be done, we need to have the chairman make those decisions to protect this community. It doesn't need to come through a committee as soon as what we would like. We need to make these decisions. We need to make them now. So just as long as we make sure that the decision-making that needs to be done isn't by any means diminished, I'm good with it. I think the chairman's done a great job. I applaud him. I applaud Dr. Martell, also the mayor. But
this is something that we've never experienced before. It's going to have financial devastation that we've never seen before. So to say that we aren't going to be financially impacted would be a mistake. We are going to be. What that impact is, we don't know. But we have to do what we can right now to protect the people that live here and call this place home. So whatever we can do to speed this process up, get the red tape out of the way, let the chairman make the decisions, come back to the board, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goro. Mrs. Goro, and then Mr. Kelly.
Well, I want to thank Keith. I want to thank Gene Crosby for what they have said. You know, people get hit by a horrible tornado that wipes out communities. And that's fast, quick. Within 10 minutes, it's over with, and it's been so devastating. This is a slow-moving tornado that by the time it gets done, it's going to be wiping out a lot of our citizens. And always remember, the next life that's taken could be yours. So keep that in mind. We can hackle over all this as long as we want. But when we come right down to it, do remember the next life might be yours. And we're getting closer and closer to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goro. Mr. Kelly.
Yes,
Yes.
I just wanted to add an amen to what Bert said.
Yes. Thank you. Anyone else? Comments? All right. So I just want to address one thing. In no shape or form am I putting a dollar amount to prevent anyone from doing what they're supposed to do. This resolution does say $100,000. Just want to point that out as a clarification. At no point are we saying we are not going to give any money or any of that sort. Just want to reiterate. And you're right, Ms. Crosby, you can sugarcoat it, whatever the case may be. I think it's a good resolution to get passed through. Obviously, it came through the departments. They just wanted to make sure that everybody was communicated on the process. So later on the road, you know, they would be able to account for that money, whatever the case may be. So this in no shape or form is it putting, restricting no purchases or whatever. It's just, this is the process that was kind of done on this end. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And, you know, there's more talk and we'll talk about it. I know we're getting short on time, but I just wanted to bring that up as well. So with that being said, we'll take a vote on this. All in favor of approving the resolution, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. The next item is other matters. Just real quickly, what we kind of talked about. I don't know if you guys been receiving the hotel occupancy from RBDC from John Gross. He's already projecting where they're at right now. Revenues are not looking great whatsoever when it comes to that, and the occupancy when it comes to the hotels. So please take a look at that. You guys get that. It's got the graphs, the charts and everything on there. It's very informative. Please take a look at that just to see what the trends are currently right now. And, you know, from my perspective, it shouldn't be something that we're like shocked or anything that's currently going on with business being shut down, people being at home on a shelter in home. So just take a look at that information because I know there's going to be a couple challenges coming that way. Any other questions, comments, or other matters before this committee? All right, seeing none, can I get a motion to adjourn? Mr. Gurl and Mr. Fiducia, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. All right, motion carries. We are adjourned now. Thank you very much.
So we're ready then for the board meeting, I take it? Give me a 1 minute recess here, just a 1 minute recess.
Oh dear, I think our YouTube channel just made the Daily Show.
You're gonna send it in?
Hey,
Yeah, I think so.
before we get in, could I ask, I see Clerk Gummo's there. Could I ask her to contact me after the meeting? I have a question on the election that was brought up to me today. If you could contact me, I'd appreciate it.
What was my math? Was it, Dan? 300, 100,000? That wasn't the joke, was it?
No, that definitely wasn't the joke.
Well, that's good, Keith.
I'm not great at math, and I thought it made sense at the moment.
It made sense to me. I was writing it down.
So we'll go ahead and if it's okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'm not aware of any agenda updates at this time. And then unless there's any objection, I'll have the clerk please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Westcott? Was that a yes, Mr. Westcott?
Doesn't matter. I'm gonna go over here and look for the finance stuff.
Are we getting interference? Mr. Arena?
Here.
Mr. Billich?
Here.
Mr. Booker?
Here.
Mr. Butita?
Here.
Mrs. Crosby?
Here.
Mr. Fellers?
Here.
Mr. Fiducia?
Here.
Mr. Girl?
Here.
Mrs. Gorel?
Here.
Mr. Hoffman?
Here.
Mr. Kelly? Mr. Kelly? I thought he was on earlier.
I'm going to get a card.
He is on.
Mr. McDonald?
Here.
Mr. Neighbors?
Here.
I think I saw Mr. Neighbors on earlier. Was that a yes?
I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Red?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Salgado?
Present.
You want me?
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Tassoni?
Present.
Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? That's 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So I will go to, I'll go through, we do not have any awards or proclamations. We do not have anybody who signed up for public comment this evening. So then I would skip ahead to number 7, board member correspondence. Go ahead and put your hand up if you want me to call on you, and I'll be happy to acknowledge any board member comments at this time. Yes, yes, sir, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was contacted by a county business today that was effectively shut down by the health department. This establishment sells groceries. I'm very concerned about the health department closing this place down. I'm just very curious what criteria the health department's using, how we're deciding what businesses are essential and non-essential. You can look at it. It would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. I would just say, and we will get a follow-up on that to the whole board, is that between the health department and I believe Charlotte and the state's attorney's office, working with other partners, have spent a lot of time deciphering and interpreting the governor's executive order. And if anybody from legal wants to jump in, just in a general sense, not about this specific issue, I do know that the general issue you're referring to had to do with we allow for marijuana sales through the executive order, but then some tobacco shops are shut down or something like that, not getting into the specific business. And I do believe that the marijuana shops are open legally. They're exempt in this order, but that some tobacco shops are in fact shut down. And I'm not being very articulate, but I do know that's being reviewed actually as people call in and that. Is there anything legal wants to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Charlotte Leclerc is working hand in hand with Dr. Martell, not hand in hand, socially distanced. But I think probably the best thing to do would have Mr. McDonald's concern forwarded to Dr. Martell, and if you'd like to communicate that to me offline on this when we're done, Keith, I'd be glad to forward that to her.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The guidelines that we are using are specifically outlined in the governor's executive order. In addition, you can go to the DCEO website, and it has a list of essential services, and that is the criteria that is being used. My understanding in speaking with some of the state officials is that the marijuana sales are continuing because of the medical marijuana, so they don't want to prevent those individuals who use medical marijuana from having that. But certainly if you are not listed under the essential services on the DCEO website, you're not considered an essential service. The DCEO website also has a list of questions that business owners can go through to self-assess whether or not they really are a business with essential services.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'll go back to Mr. McDonald, but just so you know, for legal and for Mr. McDonald, I'm in front of my computer, so I just forwarded the particular issue that Mr. McDonald referenced. I just sent it to you, Charlotte and Dave. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay, thank
you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I'm not going too far in a public setting like in which we are. It's tobacco and pantry. And I looked it up. They sell milk, bread, eggs. So it's not just a tobacco shop. It's a kind of an all-in-one.
Understood.
My understanding is if they sell food, that they are considered essential. So we can certainly look into that for this business owner. And I did receive your email, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Mr. McDonald's reacting to the letter that I think indicated that they should shut down. I see him nodding his head yes. Anything else you want to add, Mr. McDonald, or you're good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Is there any other items from board member correspondence? If not, I'll move quickly into the chairman's report. So here we keep telling the public to go to credible sources for their information. The health department is working very close with IDPH, which is the state level health department. And then of course the CDC is the federal. There's good news, there's bad news, and there's good news. The bad news is you're seeing some, really harsh, bad numbers like out of New York and Chicago. The good news is because of some social distancing, because of the staying at home, although not perfect, you are seeing that some of the modeling where the experts project this out is looking better than it even was a week ago or even a few days ago. Could it change? Yes. But that is actually the first time that some of those folks were saying things that, hey, obviously these are some rough numbers. Our peak is a couple weeks out. But there's actually some indication that what we've been doing is working. That actually, I'm sharing it just because I'm tired of sharing just bad information, bad news. We did yesterday have 2 nursing facilities or long-term, basically facilities that are congregate settings, have cases. And so that was a bit of news that was talked about yesterday and today. And if you guys need any information that it's not being provided, just yell and we're going to try to get it to you. But, we're just working through this. Are there any questions? Are there any questions for me on anything related to the COVID stuff? If I don't have an answer, I'll follow it up. Yeah, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you have and maybe this was covered and I missed it. Do we have an estimate on how soon it'll be till there's sufficient testing capacity to do, all the testing that we need to control it moving forward, like after we lift the stay-in-home order?
I don't want to. I'll have Dr. Martell follow up if there's anything I'm missing, but the answer from my perspective is no. It is increasing, and the turnaround time is improving immensely compared to a few weeks ago. So, rough numbers, maybe what's 48 hours now was 7 days before, and that's very rough over many tests. We still have, a big chunk of tests pending at any given day, anywhere from 300 to 400 tests that are out that are in queue. In terms of ramping up of tests, yes, they're ramping up, but I don't know that there's anything definitive I've heard, and you'll be the first to know. The other thing I will say this, Mr. Arena was, as only he can do, was very persistent in following up about the idea of the public wearing masks. And it was about 10 days before the CDC actually changed their position on homemade masks. And now, we went back and talked about it, and the point was very valid. And there were a lot of discussions between Winnebago County Health Department, IDPH. And so now everybody's being asked to consider, it's a suggestion, wearing homemade masks, but I do appreciate that conversation, Mr. Arena. I'll follow up if there's any more detail on the testing. I can say it is changing faster than the numbers, and I'm not dodging it, but that's what I think Sandy would say too.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Any other comments on anything COVID related? All right, thank you. We can move on to our next item on the agenda, announcements and communications, and I'll turn it over to Clerk Gamow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we'll place those on file. Thank you very much. Next item of business is the consent agenda, which includes the raffle report, approval of March 12th minutes, and layover of March 19th minutes. Can I please have a motion, Mr. Billick? Thank you very much. Can I have a second? Mrs. Crosby, thank you. Item is now before the board for discussion. Consent agenda is before the board for discussion. Seeing none, I will ask with a hand raise, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, I'm going to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, County Administrator's Report. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only item I have is I think we need to recognize our county department heads and our employees. I think from the standpoint of still providing services, which they are doing, it might be on a reduced level. And, I think they're still providing those services that need to be done. So I think we need to recognize the employees and the department heads for making the decisions that they're making to ensure that things still get done. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Steve. Any questions for Steve on anything? Seeing none, we'll move on to any department head updates. I think we have a couple department heads with us. I don't see any hands up or anybody motioning. So then with that, we will move on to standing committee reports. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee has four items actually today. The first one is an ordinance imposing a special retailer's occupation tax for mental health pursuant for authority granted in Chapter 55, Act 55, Section 5-1006.5 of the Illinois compiled statutes. This is to be laid over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado.
All right, and
may I ask a quick question on that?
Yes.
I don't mean to talk over.
Can I motion to suspend the rules on this and vote on this today?
Okay. Yeah, we have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Salgado. I got a second by Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Girl. Thank you very much. So we've motioned and seconded to suspend the rules on this item. And that was going to go to my question is there a time frame related to this item? I think there is. Do you want to speak to that or does Steve?
Steve, do you want to answer that? But I believe sometime in May 1st, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This particular item or the ordinance needs to be approved by the board and sent down to the state by May 1st, along with the results of the election in order for the tax to be imposed July 1st. So I guess I would support a suspension. It'll give us more time to make sure everything is down there as opposed to wait into the next board.
Thank you very much. Any questions? What's before the board right now is suspending the rules. Any questions by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to suspending the rules? Seeing none, I will cast a yes vote for all members present. We've now suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve an ordinance imposing the special retailer's occupation tax for the mental health pursuant to the authority granted in Chapter 55, Act 5, Section 5-1006.5 of the Illinois compiled statute.
Thank you. We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on the imposing a special retailer's occupational tax for mental health. Second by Mr. Girl. Thank you. Any discussion by board members? Oh, is that Mrs. Gorel?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Second by Angie Gorel, too.
Second by Angie Gorel. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, we will cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution authorizing execution of the addendum to interlocal agreement between the city of Rockford, Illinois, the county of Winnebago, Illinois, for the 2017, 2018, 2019, and Edward Brin Memorial Justice Grant, the JAG Program Award, and I so move.
Motion by Mr. Salgado on the JAG grant for 17, 18, and 19. May I have a second, please? Mr. McDonald, thank you very much. There's some nuance with this, and can we just have an overview, Mr. Salgado or Steve, on what this is and why this is apparently over multiple years, just so everybody's on the same page.
Mr. Chapman, if you wouldn't mind addressing that, please.
Sure.
Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The particular 3 years of grants, the city was not notified until October of, I think, 2019 that these particular grants had been awarded. That the federal government initially indicated that they were not going to award grant monies for those particular years, and then things changed and they decided to do that. So these are just addendums that reflect the grant awards or the grant documents that have been previously sent in, that just allows us to go forward and receive the monies that we need to receive. The city of Rockford is the primary grantor, and they we're a sub-recipient of those monies. So in order for them to submit the grants, in order to get the monies, we need to approve these addendums.
Thank you very much. Any other follow-ups by board members? I don't see any hands up. Are there any board members? We'll take the vote. Any board members opposed to this motion? Seeing none, we will cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is resolution extending the deadline of filing applications for the senior citizens assessment freeze homestead and exemption, and I so move.
Motion by Mr. Salgado on extending the deadline for filing the senior citizens assessment freeze exemption. Second by Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Crosby. And that item is now before the board. I believe we have Mr. Hodges. We have Mr. Hodges here. Mr. Salgado, is it okay if he gives a quick overview?
Absolutely.
Okay. Tom, you there?
Maybe not.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as the resolution states, the Illinois Property Tax Code, it does set a deadline for filing the senior citizen assessment freeze exemptions for that July 1st. However, it also allows for individual counties to extend the deadline through county resolution. In consideration to the obvious concerns over COVID-19, resolution before you tonight would extend the filing deadline to that October 1st deadline. Essentially, it just gives our senior citizens who would be applying for the exemption a little bit more time. They like to come into the office to have assistance, while we're obviously encouraging them to call in for assistance or go online. The hope is that by extending the deadline, we may have an opportunity to assist taxpayers in person if and when the stay-at-home order is lifted and the administration building can be reopened to the public.
Got it. Bottom line is there's a bunch of seniors that need help with a nuanced form that flood the offices, and them doing it at the wrong time doesn't help them or us. But we will make sure everybody that wants to take advantage does take advantage. Any other questions or comments on this? Oh,
yes, Mr. Chairman. Will they go out on time though? Will they be still going out now? And then you're just extending the time they have to be returned, or will there be not be mailed out for another month or so? I'm one of those seniors. I want to know.
Understood. Tom, you want to take that?
Yeah, certainly. Mrs. Gorel, so originally they do go out about mid-March to late March. We've tentatively extended that mailing out until later in April, early May. Because when that decision was made, we weren't fully aware of the magnitude of the shutdown. So we were trying to kind of delay the mailing so we wouldn't have a flood of taxpayers coming to the counter. Right now, we're still tentatively mailing them out probably the first couple of weeks of May. That'll still give applicants plenty of time to get into the office. We do have the tentative mailing date on our website, along with a message on our voicemail.
Okay.
Follow up?
Go ahead, Mrs. Gorel.
Can they be mailed in?
Absolutely. They certainly can. What we're going to do when we do the mailing is we're going to add an additional paper that encourages people to go to our website for help or to call in. However, we're going to specifically, we'll obviously let them know that they can mail it in. We're also going to include a kind of a cheat sheet for filling out the form that hopefully will alleviate some of the confusion that normally surrounds this form.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. I see a couple hands up. Mr. McDonald, then Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Hoffman's hand was up before mine, but I'm going to go anyways.
Sorry about that.
I just want to take a moment. I said this in Finance Committee, and I want to say it in the full board as well. I'm very familiar with North Park Fire Protection District. They run a shoestring budget. It's only based on property taxes. I'm sure there are other fire protection districts in the same boat. Again, I'm all for extending it for senior citizens, but as far as if there's any thoughts of extending the deadline to pay property taxes, I don't support that. We have several different units of government that rely on people to pay their property taxes on time. And let's try to do everything we can to make sure they do pay it on time.
Mr. McDonald, thank you. That was floated, I think, by a community member to a number of public entities immediately reached out. And then we think internally, the discussion is we couldn't do it if we wanted to. So I'm not aware of any active discussions around that topic at this time. I know Steve indicated some concerns just from a budgetary standpoint, cash flow, I'm assuming standpoint, but there's no active discussions that I'm hearing internally or externally around the county doing that. Am I in the ballpark on that, Steve?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you are.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Hoffman, I'm sorry I went out of order there. Nothing personal.
That's no problem. I'll always give it to Mr. McDonald. My question is, this exemption is just for new files, right? Because you don't have to file every year, correct?
I think you do, but I'm going to go to Tom on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hoffman, so for the regular senior citizen exemption, that exemption does not have an annual renewal. That gives applicants who are over 65 years old or older a $5,000 exemption off their equalized assessed value. The senior assessment freeze is the exemption in particular that we're talking about, and that does have an annual renewal because there's an income component to that. So that one does have an annual renewal.
Can you follow up, just quickly tell me what the difference is between the two?
Absolutely. So the senior citizen exemption is for any senior who owns their property and has occupied their property as of January 1st of that assessment year. And that gives a straight $5,000 reduction off of their equalized assessed value. That's in addition to the normal general homestead exemption, which gives the $6,000 reduction off of their assessed value. The senior citizen assessment freeze sets a base year for any applicant whose household income is $65,000 or less. If they meet that $65,000 threshold or less for their household income, it freezes their assessment at that base year. So if assessed values go up, it remains at that base year that it was frozen. Obviously, if it goes down, their assessed value would go down to match that lower assessed value.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman and Tom again. Any other questions on this item? No, I don't see any hands up. So are there any, we'll go ahead and take the vote. Are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? I don't see any opposition, so I'm going to ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Passes unanimously again. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our last resolutions authorizing the county administrator to enter agreements for providing PPEs to designated healthcare providers within the county, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on the resolution authorizing the county administrator to agreements for providing PPE to designated healthcare providers within the county. May I have a second, please? Mr. Girl on the second, Mr. Hoffman on the second. Item has now been motioned and seconded and is now before the board for discussion. Hold on one second. Mrs. Crosby.
I would like to amend the motion to change out the county administrator to the county chairman, and I so move.
So we have a motion by Mrs. Crosby to change the resolution from administrator to chairman. Is there a second? I see a second, Mr. Booker and Mr. Kelly. We have a motion and a second. The item is now before the board. Any discussion on this item? Yeah, Mr. Arena.
Could Mr. Crosby explain the rationale behind the amendment, just so I understand why we're changing that?
I'll go back, Mrs. Crosby.
Absolutely. The chairman's been involved in most of the discussions with our health care providers and other municipalities, and he probably is the best person to spearhead this. And in light of the expediency of everything, I just view him as the good point person to take the mantle on this and move forward.
Who initiated this? I missed the full conversation of finance. Who initiated this resolution?
I can't tell you that.
Steve?
The resolution was initiated by myself based on a request from the IOC logistics individuals who contacted me last Friday regarding this.
So is there any problem with it? I mean, it's not going to have any detrimental effect being it chairman as opposed to the administrator, is it, Steve?
No, doesn't matter to me. I just did it because I was asked to do it. So
okay, all right, thank you.
I think what happened here's the thing, guys. No matter what, and I want to thank Steve for what he's done. I like working with Steve. I don't want anybody to take any of this the wrong way. I like working with Steve. Steve's been upfront. He's been a good partner to you guys. He's been a good partner to me. I don't want anybody to get an impression of an issue. I think there's going to be a need going forward that there's going to be things the board needs. There's going to be things the OC needs. It has to be clear so that we can go responsibly fast, but not be in a hurry. And I will say this is whatever you guys do, I'm gonna need to lean on Steve on things. And I don't want you to take any of this conversation as Frank and Steve thing, because that's just not the case. But I appreciate how crazy this thing is right now, in telling you it is. Any other discussion?
Frank.
Oh, I don't see any.
Mr. Huffman.
Somebody's talking. I'm sorry. Somebody would. Oh, Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Chairman. I want to speak up. I've been in contact with the chairman and others about this quite often, almost daily. And I agree that I think the chairman should be the point person, and that's what the purpose of the chairman of the county board should be. So I agree with this.
Crosby.
Joe, Mr. Hoffman, it sounds like, due respect, you're having a stroke. Your internet is really slow.
Am I coming through?
You're very jarbled and your speech is elongated, so we can't hear you that great. But
I might be.
We think we know where you're going on that. Here's what I'll say is I think it was probably not 100% clear to Steve when he got the question. And I think we want to have clarity. Both of us owe it to the board to be clear that the board knows that there's going to be spending of money, and then we're going to have to report quickly too, which is a fair expectation. So I appreciate when there wasn't clarity or we were doing something and then there was a question by somebody else, Steve seeking clarity on that. I see two hands up, Mr. Booker, then Mr. McDonald. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I seconded Ms. Crosby's motion only because, again, you seem to be the point man. But and again, it's nothing against Steve Chapman. Steve Chapman is our treasurer for the treasurer for our county. So nothing against Mr. Chapman at all. I don't want that taken the wrong way. Steve has done wonders for us, but I just thought maybe he had a full plate that Mr. Chairman had a little bit more time with everything that's been removed from him. So that's the reason I seconded that motion. Thank you.
There was another hand up. Mr. McDonald, I think, had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll support Ms. Crosby in the vote to support the chairman only because FEMA states the chairman of the county shall have blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. Most things that we do. It does concern me that the EOC reached out to Mr. Chapman instead of yourself to get things done. I know that you're actively involved in the EOC. You're down there every day. So it's peculiar to me that they would reach out to Mr. Chapman instead of yourself to get this done.
I think with the gown thing, it was a big purchase. Anne is the point for logistics on when we're doing masks and a lot of these things. We've spent money, but it's not been the big ticket. I think what caught Steve's attention and mine when we heard about it was there was an $83,000 gown ask that was going to be spread out to partners, and then we'd get the money back later. So that one was different, and I think that we can be clear. And bottom line is, Anne handles a lot of the purchasing procedural stuff for the EOC. She's in the front line, probably more than Steve and I. That was a weird one that popped up. That's a kind of an outlier, and I don't think I was clear. I don't think Steve was clear, and neither of us on a purchase that big wanted to have the board find out weeks later. So I guess that's one thing. It wasn't 100% clear to me on something like that big either. Thank you though. Any other discussion? So the motion and second is to flip the name from administrator to chairman. And you know, if you leave it where it's at, I'm working with Steve. If you change it, I'm still going to, on things that come to my attention, work through staff. They're the ones who do, you know, Steve would be a guy to find the money from the proper account. And we are all going to have to work together so that we all know fund balances and all that. So I'm not going to say it's unimportant. I'm just going to say we have to communicate with you all going forward as we work through this. So any other questions or comments? I don't see any. I'll go ahead, and then a yes vote would change to the name. A no vote would leave it as is, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. Yes vote makes the change.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Mr. Billich.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors.
Yes.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
All A's, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we've amended the motion, and I'll go back to Ms. So the motion's been amended from administrator to chairman. It's now before the board for consideration. Any other discussion on this? Ann Johns, I believe, is listening in one way or the other, either live on the YouTube or she's on this call somewhere. And we should probably, that spreadsheet that I saw late today that has those items on it would probably be a great place to start, because unless that's something the EOC says should not be public, I can't imagine that's the case. But short of that, you should probably get that in the hands of some folks tomorrow. So I don't think she's on here, but I know she can hear me. With that, any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, we will cast a yes vote for all members present, and we've approved the motion. I'll go back to Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that concludes our report.
Okay, good. Mr. Salgado, this has been a crazy day. I know Steve was running in a bunch of directions today. I did send him an email about connecting on some financial, just what does the net, projections and that. Maybe we can talk offline, because I think your committee is going to have a lot of work to do way ahead of the budget, obviously. And I know you've referenced that, but maybe we need to get a few people together offline and just talk about what we want to see. Cause I'm not just setting out what we may want to see out of staff for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're absolutely right. I've had discussions with Mr. Chapman, just kind of, highlight some of the issues potentially that we might be experiencing from a revenue side, from expenditure. I know Mr. Schultz has brought this up as well in one of our committees in the past as well. So it is a concern to us. And I know Mr. Chapman is to look into essentially bringing some information, not only, overall, kind of start doing some projections from the revenue standpoint based on the numbers being and on that aspect of it, from the sales tax and the 1% sales tax, all that information, it's going to have to be compiled anyways. Just think about it. We're not too far away from budget season, so it's going to compile as well, and we'll have to have those discussions. So I'm pretty confident we'll have those conversations. We'll probably, we can realign, get together, put our heads together, but also have the finance committee kind of look at the information and obviously address it with the whole board about giving transparency as much as possible and paint the real picture and not sugarcoat anything on that aspect of it. It is decisions that we'll have to make, and they are tough. I'm just, I've been looking at the data that I've seen from just the hotel occupancy that we've received. It's not looking great at all. So major concerns, but more information to go through, have these conversations and these meetings. I know Mr. Chapman's aware of it, and it's something that we kind of have triggered on his back of his mind to kind of work with the finance team, the accounting team, and get us information on that.
Got it. Thank you very much. Next item of business, zoning committee. Mr. Webster is on the line. Mr. Webster.
Are you hearing me?
I can hear you. Good.
Wow, imagine that. Okay. Yeah, zoning committee, everything's laid over again. Nothing that you see on your agenda has been through committee yet. So that's the reason for the layovers. And so the earliest we could probably do anything would be prior to the next board meeting, but because of this shelter in place, it's going to be difficult because you have a lot of public participation, or could have public participation. And so my suggestion would be to lay this over actually until our May meeting. It would be May 27th, and then the next board meeting after that would be May 28th. Now, if something changes before that, then that would be great. Otherwise, the April 22nd committee meeting would be a normally scheduled committee meeting. It would be for the board on the 23rd then at the board. But that's if we really did some maneuvering, so to speak.
Okay. So we'll just hold for now and
I would
go ahead.
Suggest letting it over. That'd be my suggestion. Lay everything over.
Got it. So we'll go ahead and lay these items over. Any other business from your committee?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee has got 2 resolutions for you tonight. The first resolution is fire alarm notification panel and device replacement at the Juvenile Detention Center. I so move.
We got a motion on the fire alarm notification panel and device replacement for the Juvenile Detention Center. Motion by Mr. McDonald. May I get a second, please? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Billick, thank you, Mr. Booker. Item is now before the board for discussion. Any comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, is there any board members opposed to this motion? I do not see any objections, so I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second resolution is to temporarily authorize the outdoor sale and delivery of alcoholic liquor, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution temporary authorization of outdoor sale of and delivery of alcoholic liquor. May I have a second, please? A second by Mr. Fellers and Mr. Billick. Thank you. Do you want to give a quick overview? Do you want me to? Do you want someone else, Mr. McDonald? Just a quick highlight why we're doing this? Or
go ahead.
Okay. So basically we have like the Rockford Loves Park. And my understanding is almost every other municipality, unless I've been misinformed, have during this kind of COVID emergency time where we're shutting down parts of businesses like restaurants or close side dining, to allow unincorporated Winnebago County to do what the municipal partners are allowing, sale of packaged liquor and also delivery as part of a way for them to generate a little bit of revenue. I know it's minimal. It does put us in alignment with our partners, and it is only for the COVID response timeframe, is my clear understanding. Anybody want to add anything? Any questions? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. It is minimal. I don't know how much is actually going to help the people that have been put off by what's going on right now. It's an opportunity for them to try to generate some revenue in this tough time and hopefully keep a few more people employed and keep their businesses going. Through the committee meeting, Mr. Emmert was on the line. He spoke about the restrictions, the qualifications for the delivery service to make sure that those receiving were actually 21. If they did not appear to be 21, they're not allowed to deliver. Again, this is minimal, but I think it's the right thing to do to help our friends out in the bar and restaurant industry.
Okay, any discussion on that item? I don't see any hands up. So are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, on that. Mr. McDonald.
That concludes our report. Thank you.
Next item of business, personnel policies, Mr. Fiducia. Mr. Fiducia. He was here.
How's that? Better?
Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead.
You're on.
All right. The Personnel and Policies Committee has 3 resolutions tonight. The first resolution is a resolution of execution of agreement with Reliance Standard to provide term life insurance and accidental death dismemberment insurance, and I so move.
We got a motion. We got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution regarding the agreement with Reliance Standard and regarding life insurance. May I have a second, please?
I'll second that.
Second, Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other? Okay, so we got a motion, a second by Mr. Fiducia, Mr. Webster. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to this motion? Okay, we'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Next item of business, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is kind of mirroring the first. It's a resolution authorizing an execution of agreement with Reliance Standard, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the authorizing the execution of agreement with Reliance Standard. May I have a second, please?
Yeah, I'll second that as well.
Mr. Webster and Mr. Billick on the second. Thank you. Item is now before the board. Any discussion? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, we'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last resolution we have is amending the corona virus response policy, and I would turn to Mr. Chapman or maybe you could enlighten us a little bit more on that one.
We'll go to Mr. Chapman, but let me get a second to Mr. Fiducia's motion on the resolution regarding the coronavirus response policy. A second by Mr. Billick. Thank you. Item is now before the board. This took a lot of work And then I think the federal stuff came out and Steve, and I'm sure Debbie had to rework things. So I'll go to Steve on this one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're correct, Mr. Chairman. We actually brought something through the last board that had reflected the federal guidelines at the time that the original legislation was approved by Congress and signed by the president. Subsequent to that, the Department of Labor issued further clarifications as to definitions of what they considered first responders, healthcare providers, etc. And this particular policy updates the particular rules to be in line with what the federal government has indicated. So.
Oops. Any other discussion by board members? And thanks again, Steve, for all your work on that. Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? We're going to cast a yes vote. I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Steve and Debbie, for your help on this one. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that concludes our report.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight we don't have a report. However, we will be looking to take an action item next week. We did meet today for discussion. We will be scheduling that accordingly, as well as asking to possibly even have a emergency county board meeting if we have to pass that resolution, which is actually awarding the $250,000 to partner with the NICDC and City of Rockford and City of Loves Park on a loan program for the small businesses in our area. A lot of questions were answered today at our meeting, and we're looking to actually move forward on that next week. And I want to take the moment to actually thank all the staff that worked diligently on it and everything. Thank you guys so much, and thank you everyone that was part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Billick. So do we want to maybe do something Monday or Tuesday, or do you want to follow up offline? We don't have to decide right now if you don't want to. But I'll piggyback after you. We'll just do a dual, back-to-back deal and try to pull almost everybody together.
That sounds good. Yes.
Okay. We'll nail down which day, but it'll be Monday or Tuesday at this point. So if you could kind of keep your eye open for that as the agendas come out tomorrow, that would be appreciated. We can get that item moved. And then if there's anything that Steve has that's waiting that you want to, I guess, bring as well, we could, if it's time sensitive anyway, we could talk about that as well. Next item of business, Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report tonight, but we have our next regular scheduled meeting will be Tuesday the 14th at 5:30.
Okay. So if we happen to do a piggyback meeting, maybe we'd let Dave go, Mr. Tassoni go first, you follow, then we follow, if it's going to be Tuesday.
If I may.
Yeah, Mr. Billick.
Yeah, I'm not looking to, absolutely, the regular meetings, whoever has a regularly scheduled meeting, we will work alongside with that and make sure that ours is piggybacked off of that, okay?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. And then we have Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Public Safety Committee has no items to bring forward to the board. I just want to make everyone aware that the current jail population is down somewhere around 550. That's about 300 less than what we were 3 or 4 months ago before this pandemic began. The corrections officers and all jail personnel are required to go through a medical screen on their way into work, where the temperature's taken and whatnot. They are temperatures taken 3 times during their shift. They have to go through a sanitation process. The corrections officers have to go through a sanitation process if they come in contact with an inmate, which brings me to inmates are issued a mask once they come into jail. It's up to them to wear the mask or not. The in-house handcuffs are sanitized after each use. And the federal inmate level has maintained, as stayed the same. And I just want to make everyone aware that for the month of March, due to the federal inmates in Winnebago County Jail, that has brought $156,000 to Winnebago County General Fund just for the month of March alone. So that is that's our biggest source of revenue, I guess, right now. So we've got to do what we can to take care of our jail and our corrections officers and medical staff in the county jail. And I just want to take this moment to wish everyone a happy Easter and to celebrate and rejoice in this holy weekend. And I just wish peace and goodwill to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Booker. Just to clarify, I thought they went from 740, not 840. Was it 740 in the jail and not 840?
They were they were in the 800s back in January and February. They're down to like 540, 550 right now.
One thing I'll follow up on, because I talked to the sheriff about this, there has been a slight uptick in certain like shots fired in a particular municipality. There is not a correlation between the people that have been let out of the county jail the last month and what they're not seeing is a correlation to then those people committing crimes. These are low risk. These are folks who maybe didn't commit a violent crime. So we're not doing something where we're making the community less safe because I've asked that question like 5 times. That is not what we're seeing.
Correct.
One thing, since we're on public safety, if I could just add this, I talked to Deb in HR. So we have not had a COVID case in the jail from either staff or inmates. We have not had a confirmed case in River Bluff. Unlike the community, you probably know this, or most of you do, if there is in a congregate setting, like either one of those or a nursing home, if they have one, then they treat the whole facility like everybody has it, and a bunch of other protocols go into place. What we're going to do, unless there's a lot of objection, and I really hope there's not, you saw a facility congregate setting have a thing. All that by law you have to do is communicate with the health department. But we had a private sector partner in a congregate setting share that information, not the person, but just the idea they had an exposure or they had a case. I think if we have an issue with an officer in the nursing home or in the jail, that we get out in front of it. We do not violate HIPAA. We have a letter that we work with HR, with Steve, with the various department heads, and then we would own it and we'd put it out and we'd reassure the community, here's all the things we've been doing. Here's all the new protocols in place to reassure the community. What I would be concerned is if we don't do that, people have a right to talk about their own medical situation. And then all of a sudden it's all over Facebook. And then the media is calling 20 board members about a problem you might not even know about, or you might not have the details on. So, follow up if there's a problem with that. But the plan right now would be to just put a general statement out about if we do get to that point. Hopefully we do not. Go ahead. Somebody was talking. Mr. Webster?
Yes, thank you. When I heard the numbers of inmates that got released quite quickly there, it just begs the question, why didn't we do this all along? These are nonviolent people, apparently. And so it just makes me wonder why those numbers were up that high and why we could release so many so quickly. And then following up on that, a lot of the money that the sheriff department was collecting was due from the commissary money. And so now you're going to have a couple hundred less inmates in there contributing to the commissary income. And so I just hope that doesn't have a negative effect. It's going to have to in one way or another, but I hope it doesn't have a severe negative effect on what the sheriff's department has committed to funding through that commissary money. Do you follow me?
Understood. I know we have the state's attorney on the line here, and only thing I've heard about the whole jail piece is that the entire public safety apparatus at the county has worked together. The courts, the SA's office, and the sheriff, I'm sure the public defender too, to really do it the most effective, responsible way possible. I know they had a bunch of meetings so that they did this the right way. Is there anything you wanted to add, Marilyn, or no?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just rest assured that this has been a continuous collaborative discussion with the sheriff's office, with the chief judge and the chief judge of criminal, Chief Judge Dougherty, as well as Chief Judge of Criminal, Judge McGraw. My office goes through all of those files to make sure that there are no violent offenders being reconsidered to be released on bond. And that's basically what this is. This is a collaborative effort to reconsider those monetary bonds that have been placed on low-level felony offenses. And again, as you know, there is a push from the Supreme Court after they did an analysis to basically go towards no cash bonds. And so what we were doing is looking at those low-risk, nonviolent felony offenses of individuals who simply could not post the bond that had been placed on them at a bond hearing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Follow up, Mr. Webster?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that because the fewer amount of persons that are incarcerated, that's less pressure on our corrections officers that are in there. And so from that respect there, I think it's a win-win to release these people that are nonviolent and there's no threat of them, I don't know, or a lesser threat of them being, I don't know, another violator to our society for whatever reason. And so I'll even go with that. But I will say this, one added note before I go. I have been listening to the meetings all night long. Because of my location, I do have trouble connecting to things, but I listened to the two previous meetings as well. So, and I've been through this one all night long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't mean to step on Mr. Booker's toes as Chair of Public Safety. Mr. Neighbors had a question, I believe it was our last meeting. And he was asking, I don't think it got answered properly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Neighbors, but I think the point you were trying to get to was what the jail staff was doing to protect the inmates and how to make sure that the inmates were receiving good care. I had a conversation last night with Superintendent Redmond, and he did assure me that all the staff of the jail, they are having their temperatures taken prior to entering the jail to make sure that they don't spread anything or bring anything in with them.
If I could just add in, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn.
Okay, thank you. So again, we work very closely with the Sheriff's Office as well as Superintendent of the jail, Mr. Redmond. He's done an excellent job about being proactive in this pandemic crisis in which the jail and the whole community and the country is facing. So there have been parameters put in place weeks ago by the jail to protect inmates, to isolate inmates who might become infected, and also to make sure medical staff at the jail is assessing anyone that is booked into the jail, as well as correctional officers. They provided protective gear, PPE, as it's commonly referred to as well. And so they've done an excellent job sanitizing, keeping everything in pristine condition to make sure that no germs are passed. And I think they've done an excellent job. And as I indicated earlier, we have an ongoing dialogue. We talk almost on a daily basis with the Sheriff's Department and his staff to make sure that inmates are being kept safe and that individuals such as attorneys have an opportunity to interact with those individuals without putting either one in jeopardy of their health.
Understood. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marilyn. Anything else to add, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Booker? on that topic. I would just add real quick, the CDC guidelines. I think there's protocol laid out, and I believe being followed to the T. I think everybody's on their toes on this stuff internally. So any other quick items on this? Okay.
I did want to say something.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Neighbors, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the sheriff did call me the next day and clarify some things that did answer my questions. And the report the reports that we got today really sound a lot better than the answers I got last week. So I'm really satisfied with the way things are going down at the justice.
Good. No, good to hear, and I'm glad you connected with the sheriff. Thank you, Mr. Neighbors. Anything else on this topic? Seeing none, is there any unfinished business for the board? I see a hand up, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a correction, that Public Works meeting Tuesday should be at 5 p.m.
So if we do anything, we will follow your 5 p.m. Meeting. Anything else that night will follow that. Thank you very much. We'll note that. Any other unfinished business, any new business before the board? I don't see any hands up. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I see Mrs. Crosby and a second by Mr. Fiducia, Mr. Girl, Mr. Booker. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion, our meeting's adjourned. Have a good night and stay safe, everybody.
Ditto.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Clerk Gummo.